9th named system of the year. That's Tropical Storm Nate. We talked about its formation yesterday, first as a tropical depression, number 16. Now it's made that upgrade. It's strengthened a little bit to a tropical storm named Nate. Can you see where it is here on the satellite imagery? Kind of hard to pinpoint, right? Not a very well-organized system. In fact, it's already over land in northeastern parts of Nicaragua. You can barely make out its... So that's when that was. But I want to show you here the Hurricane Hunter aircraft. This is the P-3 Orion Kermit that we just talked about. It is flying a grid pattern over the Gulf of Mexico, well ahead of where Nate is heading to sample the environment here to put into the computer models that'll be run from here on out to kind of see where this is going to head. Let's revisit the satellite imagery here. Remember, this is the infrared imagery. The brighter cloud tops, the whites, the blacks, and the reds indicates colder, higher clouds. The higher or taller they are, they're higher up in the atmosphere, colder atmosphere at that point, and that indicates very healthy growth in thunderstorm activity. They're not being blown off by heavy wind shear. So that's some good news. When we see a lot of that around the center of circulation, it gives us an indication it's a very healthy storm. Not seeing a whole lot of that right now. You can kind of pinpoint where the center is. Referencing, different tropical development methods and things that are needed. So I thought it would be pretty helpful to show you the ingredients necessary, almost a recipe of sorts, to let you know what is needed to see a tropical storm like Nate to kind of take shape. Away from that, tropical systems seem to die out. So we do have the favorable wind shear. This is the current and future outlook for wind shear environment. You're looking at the blue areas and some yellows indicating the winds are very light to loft, allowing the thunderstorms to develop as this moves north. And pretty much the projected path is right here. And you notice there's a lot of blue and a real lack of the pinks and reds, which indicates unfavorable areas for wind shear. Functioning tropical system. It just doesn't grow and sustain itself. Now we have the ocean water temperatures. Remember, that's the main ingredient, 80 degrees or warmer. Certainly have that here. And of course, that hot water, that warm water extends to a depth, which is also an ingredient necessary, allowing that fuel, that ocean heat content, to be used as a fuel source for these systems. Now, look at how much above average these sea surface temperatures are. 2 degrees above normal. All right, here's the official National Hurricane Center track and stats on the system. As of the 11 o'clock advisory, it is currently situated over land, but it will reemerge back over open water here by as early as tonight and start to re-strengthen as it's going to be back over a very warm ocean water area, ocean heat content, and very low wind shear. So all ingredients we need for that development. Then it's going to scoop by pretty much grazing Cancun. If this center does stay just 20, 30 miles off to the east there and out over open water, this will be a drastically different system by the time it emerges over into the Gulf of Mexico. It wouldn't have that land interaction that may weaken it just slightly. So once it hits the Gulf of Mexico, it is forecast to strengthen into a Category 1 hurricane. The trouble with this system isn't so much going to be the track, because that is, I don't want to say straightforward, but it is certainly a much easier forecast track with the steering mechanisms that are in place, taking it pretty much due north. We're not looking for any turn to happen like we had with Irma, like we had with Maria, that sort of deal. This time around, it's going to be the intensity forecast that might be tricky due to the environment being just well above average. Rapid intensification is highly likely here. So a Category 1 is probably way underdone and very, very conservative. So we're going to have to watch that closely as it moves pretty much right down the center of the Gulf of Mexico. And then possibly, as of the latest advisory, that cone of uncertainty stretches from the far western part of the Panhandle in Florida all the way just to the west of New Orleans in Louisiana. So that cone of uncertainty isn't huge, but it certainly encompasses some very populated areas, as you know, in the Gulf of Mexico along the Gulf Coast there as it makes landfall late Saturday night in early Sunday. Good Friday afternoon. It is October 6th. Time for our daily tropical update on Tropical Storm Nate. In fact, here's a look at the latest mission from the P-3 Orion Kermit there. Found a wind speed of 62 miles per hour in the northeastern quadrant of the storm. If you've watched videos before, we've talked about how that northeastern quadrant is always the strongest part because it factors in the forward momentum of the storm, the forward speed in which it's moving. And right now, Nate's moving at about 21 miles per hour, so nearly a third of this wind speed is its forward momentum. So that's pretty interesting there. Here's a little quick briefing on that storm direction and that northeastern quadrant. Always going to find the front right or the northeastern quadrant, the strongest winds, thanks to what we just talked about there, that storm direction and storm motion. Here's Nate. Here's how it's looking on satellite imagery. This is the infrared, and we're looking for those white cloud tops. That indicates the highest or the tallest clouds and the coldest as it heads to the north. All right, here's the latest advisory from 11 a.m. from the National Hurricane Center. Some things to note here. Certainly an upgrade in terms of strength with sustained winds now 40 miles per hour, gusts a little bit higher at 65, but the momentum or the movement is at 21 miles per hour. It has tripled its forward speed in the last 24 hours, and that in itself could be detrimental to this becoming a real beast of a storm, as it's going to limit its time over the very warm open waters of not only the Caribbean, but then eventually into the Gulf of Mexico within the next 12 to 24 hours. Let's go through the track here. This is the latest update. Notice it tracks it off towards the north, and there has been a slight adjustment off towards the east here, just enough that it looks to keep the majority of the storm, the central rotation, right off the coastline of the Yucatan Peninsula, right near Cancun and Cozumel, and that keeps it over open water, meaning little disruption in its strengthening. It moves north there, sailing, increasing that forward speed even more than it is already, and also a little bit further pushed east in terms of that landfall. A little bit earlier this morning, it was pushed right over New Orleans. Now it's looking somewhere along Mobile and Mobile Bay in Alabama by the later part of Saturday and early Sunday, possibly as a Category 1, if not a little bit stronger by that point, determined on how much it strengthens in the next 24 hours. It moves from there farther inland, gets absorbed by an incoming cold front and kind of torn apart, and then its rain gets spread out along the spine of the Appalachian Mountains, possibly spreading some of that rain towards the East Coast and towards Hampton Roads in our direction here, which we could use it. Been exceptionally dry. I want to talk about just the vast distance this storm is going to cover in just a relatively short amount of time. So where it's going to be located later on this evening around 7 p.m., just off the Yucatan Peninsula around Cozumel and Cancun. From this area all the way to where it's projected to make landfall in Mobile is around 650 miles. And notice the time frame here. That's at Sunday at 7 a.m. So it's going to cruise 650 miles in just under 30 hours. Yeah, it's a big feat, and that means that it's also going to limit its time, only 30 hours being over these very warm waters, so strengthening could be limited. Although it's unlikely of it becoming a beast of a storm, it has happened before. In fact, Hurricane Opal back in October of 1995, similar setup, although it was on the western side of the Yucatan Peninsula, but it covered a similar distance at a similar speed in about 24 hours, but instead it went from a Category 1 all the way to a Category 4 in that time. There is one difference, though. It's kind of sat and meandered here over the southern parts of the Gulf of Mexico near the Bay of Campeche and strengthened a little bit more. We don't have that luxury with Nate, as it's going to be cruising northward, so that's some good news that it won't strengthen as much. So that's something to look at there. Very interesting looking back at the climate models from Hurricane Opal. Also, the last hurricane to make landfall in the central Gulf Coast was back in October of 2002, and that was Lily. So it's been quite a while for this area, at least in October. Obviously, it's been sooner than that with Katrina in 2005 and numerous other storms, but in October in this area, the last storm was Lily to make landfall there in October of 2002. Let's look at the models now and talk about how this is going to be steered northwards. Now, the reason why it's going to be accelerated northbound is because there's an area of high pressure.
Good Saturday morning, everybody. Well, I wanted to bring you an update on Nate. It is now a hurricane. It actually became a hurricane overnight tonight, so it has been upgraded. So I want to show you 85-mile-per-hour sustained winds. It is a Category 1 hurricane. At the 5 o'clock advisory, winds were at 80 miles per hour, and we've got gusts up to 100. It is racing, though. It's moving to the north-northwest at 22 miles per hour, so it is moving very quickly, and it's over the Gulf of Mexico, which has some very warm water, so it's not a surprise that it did strengthen overnight. Now, by Sunday morning, it is expected to make landfall near New Orleans and close to the Florida Panhandle. Winds up to 90 miles per hour, so still a Category 1 hurricane. And then beyond that point, remember, hurricanes need water to sustain themselves or even to grow, and it's going to stay over land. So what that means is it will then become a tropical storm as we push into Sunday afternoon, and then by Monday morning, post-tropical. So it loses all of its tropical characteristics and just becomes a regular area of low pressure. Now, it will start to move closer to our region, so we will have chances for rain in the forecast, mainly as we push into Monday and into Tuesday and lasting into Wednesday as well.